Good evening, one and all. Welcome to the Pink and Preview Show. My name is Connor Southwell. Going to be joined by Paddy in a moment as we look ahead to Norwich City's game against Preston North End at Carrow Road tomorrow. 1,000 fans are going to be in attendance, which I think is going to be a bit surreal, but we'll get to that later. Of course, throughout the next sort of 45 minutes or so, make sure you get all of your comments, thoughts, opinions in. We'll try and get through as many as possible, whether you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, and we'll discuss them with Pad, and we'll try and get through as many of those as possible in the hour. I wanted to start, of course, with the news that broke sort of late last night that former Norwich City Chief Executive Gordon Bennett sadly passed away. Of course, he dedicated more than 10 years to Norwich City Football Club, originally as a youth director responsible for bringing in the likes of Craig Bellamy, Darren Eadie, Chris Llewellyn. We could name a lot more than that. And then he went on to be Chief Executive at the club before leaving to Aberdeen. And of course, he played a massive part. It's widely credited with sort of restoring the financial order off the pitch, and of course, set up the Friends of Norwich City Youth, which was a supporters group that over 16 years pumped more than 350,000 into the club's academy setup. Keith Webb paid tribute to him last night, but very sad news, and no doubt a big loss. Paddy, let's start with you. I mean, there's only one place to start really, which is the return of fans. 1,000 going to be inside Carrow Road tomorrow. Is that going to be maybe I'm thinking about this a little bit differently, but is it going to be more or less surreal than games behind closed doors, do you think?
What I'm interested to see is the noise that 1,000 can generate. Now, I should have done my research. Has there been, did I imagine it, because my head's been down in turning content around for our print pages over the last hour or two. Has there been an advisory just gone out about what fans will be allowed to do when they're in the ground in terms of noise and animation?
Yeah, so we spoke about that on, when was it? When the news came out, Wednesday possibly, or the days feel like they merge into one. But when we did our Facebook Live, Dave, me and Lakers, we spoke about that the other day as a big document. But as far as I'm concerned, it should, I think, be made clear to the supporters that are attending in terms of mask wearing, obviously social distancing, interaction outside of the bubble and all that. I think a lot of it is probably going to be aligned with sort of the government regulations at the moment, but it's certainly going to be interesting, especially given, and I don't want to get into this too deeply because there are people better qualified and probably better placed to talk about this than us, but just in terms of Alex Neil summed it up, didn't he, in terms of it's kind of against the backdrop of surging coronavirus cases, so it feels a bit strange, I guess. Well,
yeah, I mean, look at the national picture beyond the parameters of sport, and the Northeast is now going into a much tighter lockdown. I've seen reports that there'll be other areas of the country could follow suit next week, and I've even seen something in the FT apparently today that October, when it comes around to half term, might be a full-on national lockdown again, which is taking us right back to the sort of March period. And if that is the case, then those 1,000 who are lucky enough to be in attendance tomorrow might want to treasure that, because if the transmission rates nationally are tracking in this way, and the response from the government and the public health bodies is to impose more of a national measures, then Norwich will not be allowing fans back in, because you can be pretty sure that the football authorities will have to follow suit. And if that is the case, then yeah, it feels a bit of a false start, really. But that's all hypothetical. We don't know. I mean, in the last week or two, the 6-person rule has been brought in with the idea, hopefully, of arresting the increase in the transmission rates. Not in East Anglia, it's worth saying. I think that's still one of the lowest transmission rates in the entire country. But obviously across the country, there are some real hotspot areas for concern. And if that is the case, then yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised. But I'm only coming at it from somebody who sort of observes news stories, as we all do. But it would appear that we might be heading or on the cusp of going back into more of a tighter measure. So if that is the case, tomorrow might be quite a unique experience for those 1,000 lucky enough to be in Carrow Road, definitely.
Yeah, I believe Norfolk was actually taken off the government watch list today, wasn't it, after that Bannon poultry outbreak, which is good news. So hopefully that does remain. Although the other game that is going to be piloted is Middlesbrough against Bournemouth, and if you consider where Middlesbrough is in the northeast, of course, Neil Warnock tested positive for coronavirus this week, and I'm sure everyone wishes him a speedy recovery. But it's kind of a juxtaposition, really, if you've got an area in sort of much tighter restrictions than we currently have, but are also hosting a pilot event. So those two don't quite match up. Craig, I can see a few comments filtering through. We'll start with Craig Brown. He said, "Hello, gentlemen. Disappointed not to be going to the Preston game after applying for it. Will fans be able to go to the Derby home game?" Well, this is it, isn't it? It's such a fluid situation that the Derby game is what, October the 3rd, I believe. It's just been selected for TV. It's now going to kick off at lunchtime rather than 3:00, so same day but slightly different kickoff time. We don't know what it looks like going forward. As it stands, the plan is to have a phased return of supporters from October the 1st, isn't it? So as we sit here, you would say that Derby game is a possibility for fans to return perhaps on a bigger scale.
Yeah, I mean, there's two parts to this. There's what the footballing authorities, and then within that, clubs like Norwich would like to do, which is clearly this pilot to go off without any issues at all. And then demonstrably, they can prove that they could maybe lift the levels of fans who would be allowed in. That's fine. But then set against that is, as to repeat ourselves, where we are in terms of the national picture as a society. And if these measures that they've now brought in recently, the 6-person sort of groupings, don't have the desired effect, and as you rightly say, the North East looks en masse to be in a much tighter situation, then I think it's really irrelevant what Norwich want to do as a club or the Football League in broader terms. They will ultimately be told what they're going to do by government and public health bodies. And that's why, I mean, to answer, is it Craig? Sorry, Craig's question about Derby. No, anything beyond here is hypothetical. Anything beyond Preston tomorrow, because Preston is the only confirmed 1,000 supporters signed off. It's going to happen. Those supporters have been told today that they're in. You know, we'll hope then that a pilot is a success. But I just go back to what Daniel said earlier today at Colney, that this is the first step. But we can't really talk about steps 2, 3, 4 because we don't know how this first step goes, do we? So, yeah, I think any debates about, okay, the next Norwich game at home, the game after, so on and so forth, even away games, pretty redundant until we get through this weekend, see how it goes. And then probably more importantly, it's less about the footballing side of this, more about the societal public health issues. Yeah,
and just finally on this point, it's worth noting that I think Oliver Dowden, who is the Minister for Sport, had a meeting yesterday with
quoting politicians on here, mate.
I was just giving an update to the fact that he had a meeting and the Premier League were certainly released a statement pushing for supporters back, which I think could be quite a big intervention, judging by how big an entity that is. But we'll leave that there because, as I said, there's people much more qualified to speak about this than us. Let's have a few more of the comments then as we begin to look ahead to tomorrow's game. Craig Matlas on YouTube. This is probably one for you, Pad. Hi, guys. Do you think we'll get any of Alex Neil's curly finger tomorrow? And he's predicting a 2-0 win for Norwich.
Yeah, we've got some great pictures of that man in his pomp on the touchline. Not a man you'd want to cross, that is for sure, when he's got his dander up. 2-0. Yeah, we'd take that. If it was 2-0, then he might be less than impressed with his own team. But yeah, I mean, the reality is, before they lose to Swansea opening day of the season, there's all this going on in the background clearly about players who they feel are getting tapped up, some of their better players. And I think there's a frustration they've not done the business they want to do in terms of adding to the squad. And that all came to a head, really. I mean, there's some spiky sort of comments from Alex Neil prior to going to Derby, winning in the League Cup. So, of course, then, brilliant, one result turns the mood around. And they will come buoyant to Carrow Road, because ultimately, I'd imagine Alex Neil will be saying, well, let's be honest, most people would expect Norwich to win this game. You know, they're the Premier League. I think he even basically said they're a Premier League squad, essentially, in the Championship. And that might be a bit of kidology. And I'm sure internally he'll be telling his boys they're more than good enough to turn them over tomorrow. But, yeah, ultimately the pressure's on Norwich for me tomorrow to follow up what they did at Huddersfield, which was a scratchy, got the job done, areas to improve, understandably, given the abbreviated pre-season, then the international departures in the week or two prior. But if they could follow up tomorrow with a win, hopefully, and a better performance, then you really feel Norwich, we can almost close the book on what's gone before, and now we're looking ahead. Because for me, and Daniel touched on it today, Preston are your acid test in the Championship. You know, under Neil, he's been there 2-3 seasons. I think now he's managed to get them to a position where, okay, you wouldn't immediately put them in your top 2 predictions at the start of the season, but consistently they're in that playoff mix very deep into the season, and they fell away slightly the last 2 seasons. But they're a real streetwise championship outfit, and if Norwich were to get the result tomorrow, to me it fuels the belief that this could be a very good season.
Yeah, I can see a certain individual already dominating our comments in terms of a player. So we'll come to him in a moment, and there's probably no guesses for who that is. But just in terms of this game, is it more important this week that Norwich City do get a bit more of a cohesive performance? Because we saw last week, and I think your tweet summed it up pretty well, where he said it wasn't pretty, but it was pretty effective. And last week did feel more so about the win and the importance of sort of breaking that run that they were on, that losing run that they were on, and almost helping them shift the narrative, I guess. And you do need to grind out 1-0 wins like that. Just ask Marcelo Bielsa and Leeds United last season. As good football they play, it wasn't always the free-flowing stuff that perhaps they're associated with. Is it more so about signs and shoots, I guess, of progression, particularly with some of the attacking players? Because it felt a little bit at times, particularly Kieran Dowell and Todd Cantwell, perhaps, that, again, it is going to take time to gel, but maybe they were just taking each other's space up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't get too hung up in the sort of the style points. Ultimately, they won a game where they were probably in second gear, and that, for me, given what we saw last season, I know it's the Premier League and we know in the Championship, but there was a lot of games where they played very well in terms of, stylistically, and didn't get a result. And ultimately, you don't get enough results, whatever league you're in, you're not going to achieve what your objectives are. And for me, watching that last week, I thought, yeah, I like that. That's a good sign. That by no stretch were they at top gear, yet they did enough. I mean, Tim Krul didn't have a save to make, and they relied on initially a poor back pass by Sturman, which Pukki then squares to Ida, but they were still comfortable. It was a comfortable 1-0 win for me, that, and that's a good sign, because ultimately, Daniel again referenced it today, he's had a full week to prepare this week now, from Huddersfield to today. A full week uninterrupted with all his players on the training pitch. I don't think he's probably had that all pre-season, really, and certainly didn't have it in the week leading up to Huddersfield with the international overhang. So you would hope that there'll be a bit more cohesion tomorrow, and if we see a little bit more, I don't think we're going to go suddenly from night to day and they're suddenly going to look like Barcelona. I wouldn't expect that at all. But ultimately, yeah, you would think they will be better for the hit out last week and with a week's full training to work on a few more things.
You certainly would. I don't think would want to look like Barcelona at the moment, perhaps. that's probably a different point altogether. Right, before we delve into Emi Buendia, I'll put Tony on notice to prime up the clip of Daniel Farke talking about him, because he's obviously back from his suspension this week.
You're gonna sing the song, mate. You're gonna sing the song.
What, the Emi Buendia song?
Yeah, go on, mate.
I've got some windows on here, so I don't want those to break. So I think it's probably best that I don't, to be honest. Okay. Let's hear what Daniel Farke had to say about Emi Buendia today, and then we'll get into the comments and have a little bit of a chat about him. Here's Daniel Farke in his press conference today.
I'm pleased with his behaviour, because he was quite humble and quite disciplined also after his red card. So he apologized in front of the group, and since this moment he worked unbelievably disciplined and hard. So also after he came back after the short summer break, he was physically in a top class condition, top body weight, also with his endurance status top class. So pretty much prepared. It was of course a bit sad that he had this little setback and wasn't able to play in our last friendly. Because it means then with his first 2 competitive games where he was suspended, it broke, of course, a little bit of his rhythm. But nevertheless, Emi is physically in a good shape, and once he can find his shape also back in terms of rhythm and to be really ready for the games, he can be an outstanding player. And I've got the feeling that he's fully committed and totally happy to be here and totally happy with the group. And for that, I'm quite confident that he can play also, hopefully on the same outstanding level that he has delivered 2 years ago, and that's at least the plan.
So there you go. There's Daniel Farke on Emi Buendia today. Is that last? Certainly not. Is that last? Is that last comment there in terms of being happy and being committed perhaps the most important one? I mean, we've seen the article that he did earlier on this week that certainly gained a lot of traction from Norwich City fans, and people seem to be split right down the middle in terms of perhaps what exactly he meant, but we all know the quality that Emi Buendia possesses, particularly in the Championship, but in any Norwich City team.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I thought that's probably as far as Daniel Farke would go in public to underline he expects Emi Buendia to be here beyond October the 16th, I think, is the actual final transfer window deadline. But of course, to do Daniel's talking for him, that still leaves 4 weeks, and anything can happen between now and the end of the deadline. Clubs who've maybe had him on the radar don't start well or feel they need something else. Maybe he becomes a bit more of an option, whereas at the minute, maybe they've just got him on a watch list. So, and that really was the tone of his comments, I think. I think he was basically saying that he's happy here and he will give it his all until and unless the situation changes and there's a Jamal Lewis-style Newcastle approach, but obviously for considerably more money than Jamal left for. That's obvious. And for me, I don't believe that's going to happen. I think Norwich certainly won't look to cash in now at this stage because I think they've taken the view that he could be a key player in what they're trying to do and get out of this division at the first time of asking, given what he did in the Championship 2 years ago. And more importantly, that's all very well Norwich having the view that, no, Emi, you're staying here, you're part of the group. Everything you hear and see, and that was underlined by his own interview earlier in the week, would suggest that he's on board with that as well, with that obvious caveat. So if the player's happy, the club is certainly happy, and no bid materialises, then he will remain a Norwich player, and that's a massive boost for me because I think when he was walking off the pitch against Burnley after that red card, you would have taken a straw poll of 100 Norwich fans. I think the majority would have said that was his last game in a Norwich shirt, because at the very outset of the transfer window, I think the feeling probably was he would be one of, if not the most saleable asset they have, and here we are, X amount of weeks, months down the line, and he's still part of the plans. And he will feature tomorrow, but it sounded like Daniel was saying in terms of maybe just as an option from the bench because he's essentially had this injury over in Germany on pre-season tour, and then he had the international period off. So I think he said he'd only come back to full team training on Tuesday of this week. So probably a stretch, given the side won last week, to bring him straight back in, but a great option. And you can be bottom dollar guaranteed. If it's 0-0 after 60 minutes, Emi Buendia will be getting ready to come on the pitch. So I think on top of Emi's own interview earlier in the week, Daniel today has just confirmed that's where this is going. And I'm sure that you'll pick out some of the comments, but I would imagine the tone of the comments are pretty positive now because, yeah, I could see how just looking purely at Emi's interview, you could slice that either way. You know what? He's saying he's happy, but why is he doing media 4 weeks out from the end of the transfer window? Why does he need to put his name in that sort of environment where he's talking about offers and sort of referenced in passing the Leeds interest? So, but I think on the back of what Daniel, as you said, and we just heard the clip play out there, I think that's a very good sign for Norwich fans in terms of Emi Buendia being here beyond mid-October.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's a difficult one for Norwich to weigh up as well, because how do you put a price on what he offers them if they are a team, as all the noises have certainly indicated, that want to get back to the Premier League at the first time to ask? And it's going to be difficult to sell that to your fans if you see one of your best players departing in Emi Buendia. So I think a few fans will be relieved to hear his comments today. Lynn, Paddy sort of answered this question, but she says, "Hi guys, do you think Emi will be in the starting 11 straight after his 3-match ban?" Another point to add on what you said today was he had a slight knock in training today, didn't he? But that wasn't one that Daniel was expecting to keep him out of the game tomorrow. No. To answer Lynn, no. Unless Daniel's doing the old free card trick, he was basically inferring that because it's essentially Tuesday of this week is when he's actually become a first team option at training. That's probably too soon a turnaround. And the reality is, if Emi Buendia is here for the season, then we all know grueling campaign ahead, 45 games as it is now, congested, I think a month less to your normal season. No point, I don't think, rushing him back tomorrow when he's not ready and then that groin goes again and he's out for 5 or 6 weeks. I think you've got to err on the side of caution, gradually ease him back in, and there's enough games over the entire piece that it won't be long that he is probably the first name on the team sheet. Yeah, I would agree with that. Craig Brown has said, I think Buendia should start the game tomorrow if he is fully fit. which I think he probably would have if he would have been fully fit. But I don't think that is quite the case. Let's see what else we've got here in terms of Buendia. Mark Davis has said, I'll be watching from Bolton. Question for me is, does Emmy play? And if so, who is left out? I'll flip this question because obviously we kind of answered whether or not we think he's going to play. But if he comes onto the bench, who's he going to come onto the bench for? Because there's so many options there, isn't there? And just finally, in terms of Buendia, as you said, they're a brilliant option to bring on off the bench. But it's equally worth noting that, as we're speaking about transfer speculation, this window has been very slow, and I think we're only starting to see things sort of pick up now. And you can follow every inch of Gareth Bale's transfer to Tottenham today. So I think that indicates it. But Chelsea have obviously picked up deals as well. Villa are starting to do business. It kind of feels like a few Premier League teams are starting to pick it up. I mean, Martin Power has said, what would be a price Norwich would accept for Emmy to leave? Do you think 20 million ? So I'll give you those sort of questions then, Paddy. Martin's question about how much is Emmy Buendia worth, essentially, and then Mark's in terms of if he's on the bench tomorrow, who does come out of it.
Well, on the valuation, without giving too much away about who said it, somebody fairly high up at that football club said to me just after they got promoted, so 2 years ago, that they thought he would be their first £40 million player. 4-0. Now, obviously, as we've framed this conversation today, these are different times we're living in now, and radically different times in all aspects of our lives. And the point you make about not huge amounts of business has been done across the whole football industry in this window. So, and of course, in between when that was the valuation, he's had a season in the Premier League, okay. You know, there'll be those who tell you his assist count was as good as Kevin De Bruyne and Dele Alli in terms of numbers, but, you know, his goal account was nowhere near. He eventually got off the mark towards the end of the season at Watford. I'm not sure overall he probably would have produced a Premier League campaign to make you think that's still a realistic valuation. And then you obviously then overlay the world we live in now. So I think certainly Maddison-esque figures, 22 million plus add-ons. But given how astute Stuart Webber is in the market, as Liverpool fan to their cost, with Jamal, maybe you could push that up 25 plus. But that's probably, you know, why Emmy Buendia is probably going to stay here, because what clubs out there would put down 25 million to prize him out of Norwich? You know, he isn't the finished article yet. He may well turn out to be, but if you've got limited resources now, you know, relative, obviously, you know, Man City's limited resources are far in excess of where Norwich's are. But if every club is now having to be a bit more circumspect, shall we say, whereas before, you know, awash with Premier League broadcast money, you might take a gamble on an Emmy Buendia. Now, I don't think clubs will do that because as we've discussed, you know, I think I saw one of the Premier League chief execs saying that every month now, without fans, there's like 100 million deficit across the Premier League, and you roll that on and roll that on and roll that on. You know, we've already had thick end of 6-7 months without any fans in Premier League stadia. If that continued, then clubs really do have to cut their cloth a bit more realistically. So. Yeah, I think you're probably looking around about 22, 25 million for me in terms of a realistic valuation. Whether they could get that in this window, I don't think so. And then in the second point, I just actually called up who was on the bench at Huddersfield. Very difficult to see who would drop out. I think you'd have to basically recalibrate, you know, your mix of attackers and midfielders. I mean, he had Rupp, Poeta, Eder, Fugel. So, you know, Rupp aside, you know, there's 1, 2, 3 attacking players there. Does Alex Tete make way? I don't know. If you've got Rupp and Alex Tete, do you need both of those as bench warmers? I don't know. You probably, if it's a case of who Emmy Buendia knocks out the 18 on duty last week, I think you're probably looking there at Tete/Rupp, Ben Gibson. Obviously, you need defensive cover, and Michael McGovern back up to Tim Krul. So, yeah, I think if he's going to accommodate him in the 18 tomorrow, it's probably going to be one of Rupp or Tete, I think.
It's almost more interesting looking at who's going to be on the bench in the starting 11 at the moment, the amount of options they've got. And it was interesting to hear him sort of respond to that and say that it almost feels like to me, because he said on record, didn't he, a couple of years ago, he preferred working with a sort of smaller squad. And I wonder if that's something that's come out of the Premier League and almost the trauma that the injury situation gave him last year, that actually maybe they do need a bigger squad, and maybe having a bit of a bloated squad and a bit more competition and variation, I think they're probably going to be the buzzwords you hear this season, is probably more important to him than perhaps the togetherness, and maybe balancing that is going to be difficult. But he essentially said it's his job to let people down, isn't it, when he tells them that they're not going to play a weekend. So it's an incredibly difficult dynamic for him. It's going to rely a lot on his man management. So no doubt that's a question that I think is going to be thrown at him probably later down the line. Lisa Jack on Facebook has said, do you think we will get back to trying to outscore our opponents and getting lots of 3-2s or 4-3 results this term, or more cagey defensive displays? It was interesting today at his press conference that he, when asked about last week's performance, he praised the defensive aspects and also probably said there's a bit more to work in terms of an attacking sense.
He did, and he started throwing out numbers. We had 16 shots. I want games where we have 20, 25, and possession was 40, 50%. I want 70, 80%. So that doesn't strike me as a man who's basically going to be parking the bus too often. So they would hope, certainly with that back four and Gibson to drop in the mix, and Hanley, I suppose, collectively that defence should be probably a bit more watertight than 2 years ago. But ultimately, I think it's still going to be a very much attack-minded philosophy and trying to dominate the ball, and then through that dominate territory and create plenty of chances. So, yeah, I don't think they'll be losing the entertainers tag any soon under Daniel Farke.
No, I think it will be subtle tweaks rather than perhaps drastic changes to how he wants to play fundamentally. Edward Ivans on Facebook, 2 comments. He said, I just don't think we are going to get back to games this season. I guess it means supporters. And then he said Jordan Hugill to get the winner against his former club, which would certainly be an interesting dynamic. Shane on Twitter said, would you change the side that won against Huddersfield? I guess Emi Buendia, who we've spoken about at length, and Jakob Sorensen might come onto the bench. I kind of took from his comments today that maybe he thinks Jakob Sorensen needs another week or so of work.
Yeah, I'd rather have Tete just because of that championship experience, really. I wasn't overly impressed with that man in pre-season. Early days, I know, and he's coming from a different footballing culture. First time away from his family probably as well. I think he just needs a bit of time to be eased into it. And then we'll see. But, I mean, there's only one player for me in that area of the pitch at the minute, and that's Ollie Skip. You know, when he's fit, he plays, and it's who plays with him.
Yeah, agreed. And we'll come back to Skip because there were some interesting comments from Daniel Farke. I'll just rattle through a few more of these comments. Dan on Facebook says, Preston are one of the few teams to beat us in the 18-19 season. I hope it's not a curse. I think, if my memory serves, that's the last championship away game that Norwich City lost, I believe. So that tells you how long ago it was. And I remember that game with quite vividly, actually, because I think Norwich hit the bar and Steedman missed the penalty and Preston won 3-1. And it maybe sort of helped the minds a little bit in terms of that run into the championship season. They just won the derby, haven't they, after that? So maybe a bit of a hangover from that. Craig Brown, if Farke selects Buendia, does that mean Cantwell or Hernandez would have to go on the bench? And then he added, what is going on with Mario Vrancic, who's not even in the matchday squad for Huddersfield? It's interesting because it sounds like Daniel Farke's kind of put Mario Vrancic in the discussion with the sort of number 10s, the attacking midfielders.
Yeah. And that's good luck with that one, Mario, because are you dislodging Dowell / Cantwell, even Buendia, and that's before you get to Marco Steedman, who's not available tomorrow, got a back issue. But I think it's pretty clear now. I think his contract situation, he's entering the final. Well, he's into the final year of his contract. I don't see him getting a new deal. I think they'd be quite happy to have him around the place. You never know. Go back to what I said earlier. Very grueling season, and there might be spells where resources dictate that he gets more of a look in. But it's quite clear if Farke's got most of his resource available in those midfield areas, Mario isn't in his thoughts for the 11, and that's a shame because, as we saw memorably in the defining periods of the Championship title-winning season, that was Mario Vrancic who dragged them over the line, and for that he'll always be fondly remembered. But to a lesser extent, but it's, for me, feels increasingly like Tribal, like Leitner. Time is moving on, and whereas those two are obviously in an ideal world, going to be moving on in this window. Maybe Mario stays, but all the signals you're getting would suggest that, I don't see him forcing his way into too many of the 18s at this stage of the season. But things can change.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And 2 points I'd make, I think his injury record as well probably hasn't helped things. And I think also the Premier League probably exposed his lack of physicality and probably mobility as well. And he's certainly not got age on his side. So, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if he falls down the pecking order to an extent. Dan Mayhew on Facebook, given Teemu Pukki had a good assist last week, do you think he'll finally score this weekend? He looked like a deer in the headlights recently. Daniel was asked a very interesting question today about Teemu Pukki, which I might be paraphrasing, but was essentially, do you think he's lost the ability to score goals for Norwich City, which I kind of felt he didn't like particularly.
Say what you mean. Yeah, say what you mean. What was his reply? Remind me again.
It was he scored double figures in the Premier League. He has a lot of pressure from club and country, and he set up the goal last week, didn't he? So it's a difficult one. But on team.
Yeah, it's a bit premature, I think, to be saying he's now lost the ability. I think whether and Daniel kind of referenced this a bit earlier in the presser, whether we'll see those stratospheric levels of goals he scored at this level 2 years ago, probably unrealistic, because he's 2 years older and he isn't the unknown commodity, as Norwich aren't really now back in the Championship. So I think it's unlikely, but I mean, it will definitely score you goals. There's no two ways about it. But Daniel again talked about this, that it's not about Teemu Pukki per se. It's about his unit, him, Ida, Hugel, weighing in with 30 or 40 goals, and how that's chopped up is immaterial to Daniel Farke. He feels his front players need to weigh in to that level to get Norwich to where they want to go. 2 years ago, the majority of those were obviously Teemu Pukki himself. Jordan Rhodes got in on the act a little bit. But this time around, I could see it being a bit more of an even split. And obviously, Ida put down a marker last week. But to be fair, that was all about Teemu Pukki's awareness. Somebody emailed me actually during the week and said, would Gary Lineker or Alan Shearer have cut that back in their pomp? And the reality is, certainly Shearer, I don't think he would have done. So, yeah, you can kind of see, well, is that a lack of confidence he's betraying there, that he wouldn't take on the attempt? But, I mean, ultimately, I know Ida, I think, said in his post-match he feared when he first hit it, he leant back too much and it was going over the bar. But it was very difficult not to score that goal. And, if we wasn't talking about the Teemu Pukki of the last 6 months, there wouldn't be any issues about, well, why didn't he shoot? It's everything we discussed with him now is filtered through that last 6 months since he did his toe/foot at Leicester last December, and hasn't looked the same player. And unfortunately, any debate about Teemu Pukki now will always only go back through that period rather than, over the entire piece of his Norwich career. It's frankly ridiculous to be having a discussion about has he lost the ability to score goals, or his goal scoring ratio is phenomenal, as good as probably goals per game any striker in Norwich's history. So, yeah, I think there's still a bit more mileage to go in these early weeks before we definitively have to start talking about, well, is it time maybe Ida comes more centre stage, or does Hugel get a go? But for now, guaranteed Teemu Pukki will be leading the line tomorrow.
Yeah, I can't remember too many people speaking about confidence when he squared the ball for Todd Cantwell to put Norwich 2-0 up against Manchester City. But there you go, something that gets levelled at strikers, isn't it, when they're not scoring goals? And I won't go into this too deeply because I think I'll probably write about it at some point. But I think it's probably one of football's greatest myths that you need a 20-goal per season striker. As you kind of alluded to there, it's more about sort of chopping up the goals equally, which, okay, he scored 11 goals last year, which is a pretty good return for a newly promoted team, but equally those behind him probably didn't contribute as much, and that's probably the area that Norwich City need to address more for me. But he does need a goal, and he needs one pretty urgently as well, just to kind of shift the narrative. And again, it's difficult for strikers because hear us talking about sort of a lack of confidence for a right back or a centre back, but that's the nature of it, I guess, isn't it? Some more questions about Emi Buendia, which I think we've covered, so I think we'll leave those. Martin Powers pointed out that there's going to be 8 games in December. Yeah, welcome back to the Championship, very much so. And of course, 2 of those moved to TV as well today in October. So that schedule's getting even more intense. Maybe it was a positive that Norwich City exited the League Cup when they did. Richard Rushell, this is excellent pre-match coverage and discussion. Thank you very much, Richard. Thanks for watching. Daniel on YouTube, do you think as the season goes on, if Pukki struggles, could you see Adam Eder replacing him as our number one striker in attack?
Well, you wouldn't rule it out completely. I mean, big ask for a lad as inexperienced as him. I mean, essentially, you could say this is his first full season as a professional in terms of you could see him as a viable option in the 11. I don't think that was the case last season. He was still very much, and more to the point, Daniel saw him very much as, an impact guy. And parallel, of course, with Preston in the Cup, which was where he announced himself getting a hat-trick in that third round tie. And I guess that answers the question, really, moving forward. He got his opportunity that day, took it in a big way. And okay, he owed maybe the start of Man United to injuries to the other guys, but all he can do, did it last Saturday. You throw him on, he gets a goal. There you go, Gaffer. Maybe you should start me in the next game, sort of thing. So I think for the top end of the pitch, read midfield areas, we've discussed that, and even defensive areas, certainly in the central defensive areas. That level of competition is to the point now where, if you're any of those players in those areas of this Norwich squad, what you've done before isn't going to insulate you from being, moved on out of the 11 and maybe taking a turn. I mean, he was quite prepared to bench Timu for the first time in his Norwich career towards the end of last season. So it's happened before, but I just think he feels not only what he brings in terms of goals over the entire piece of his Norwich career, but what he brings in something, to pounce on that mistake, draw the keeper, square it. You can't underestimate how important Timu Pukki is to the all-round way that Norwich want to play and how they want to connect midfield areas and those fullbacks. And I don't think Eder or Hugo really have kind of got that rounded element to their all-round play. So, yeah, I think for the time being, it'll be Timu Pukki, and it only won't be Timu Pukki if we get to, a month into the season and he's yet to open his account, because then you can guarantee this debate will be getting further and further up the pecking order, and Farker probably every week will be having to answer questions about, is it time to drop him out and bring either Hugo or Eder in?
Absolutely. A few more comments on Pukki, and then we'll play a preview video, and then I want to talk a little bit about Ollie Skip and Sam Byram. David Loveridge on YouTube said, I hope Pukki scores tomorrow. Shaney on Twitter, Pukki admitted if there is an easier chance to pass it, he will. It's not. It's about the team, not just himself. Yeah, I think that's probably a fair point. David has come back again. Pukki has a great football brain. He could play number 10 and feed others for goals. Eder for 30. Well, that would be quite an achievement for the old man if he managed to get 30 in the Championship. Colin, whether Timu should have put the ball across or not, the fact that he did allow Adam Eder to score, and that he will certainly help the confidence of the young striker. And then Dan on Facebook has asked you if you think Coventry will win tonight. Of course, their first, we'll say home game, because obviously it's St Andrews against QPR tonight. Are you feeling confident, Pad?
Never with Cov. Don't forget, Southwell, you said we've got to wrap this up so I don't miss the kickoff as well. Don't forget that promise.
That's very true. I'm trying to rattle through this to make sure that's the case. So we'll get the preview video now, and then we'll come back and we'll speak a little bit about Ollie Skip. Tony's playing some serious tunes there, isn't he? Goodness me. Right.
Where's he got them stats about longest medieval walls or whatever? He's been in the library today, has he?
Obviously, yeah. He obviously has.
Just put in the messages.
Wikipedia. There we go. Yeah, well, there you go. A reliable source as ever. Let's get back to Norwich City. Ollie Skipp. There were some interesting words from Daniel Farke today on him, because he's been hyped a lot on social media for his performance last weekend, and I think we saw Spurs fans hijacking the man of the match poll, because he won that quite comfortably last week. Shaney has said on Twitter, if Skipp is successful this season, I hope we can get him back on loan again next season, which again is probably to an extent kind of the conversation around him, which maybe certainly for Daniel Farke might be there's a bit too much hype about this lad a bit too soon, given he's played one game for the club.
Yeah, I mean, I'd put that to him. I said he's had a lot of praise outside the club. Straight away he came back. Well, let me tell you, inside the club, he's had a bit of criticism for that performance as well. I mean, I know the club did put out his clips reel, didn't they, of all his touches. But, I mean, Daniel, and as you say, that might be a little bit of a message to keep the feet on the ground. You don't get carried away too much. But talking about some of his positional decisions and, the areas of the pitch he found himself in, he needs to work on. Of course, he's like Adamina, a very young man making his way. He's not going to be the finished article, but I think I've seen enough anyway, at least in both pre-season, as much as you can judge anything by pre-season. Patrick Roberts is all I'll say on that one. And and obviously more importantly at Huddersfield, that, they looks to be a good player, a really good player there. Just a very calm, composed operator. And obviously, you don't come through Tottenham's academy unless, you've been schooled in the right way. So spoke to him out of Germany, and I didn't get the sense he was a player who was a bit too arrogant, a bit too cocky for his own good, and would get a bit carried away. I think he's seemed quite a humble guy, quite down to earth, and I think Daniel said it in the answer today that they did a lot of work in terms of the background, the personality sort of side of what are they getting, not just the footballer but the person as well, and they felt he was one who could really add something to their group. And early days, I know, but yeah, he definitely looks an upgrade, it has to be said, on what Norwich have had in that central area of the pitch since Daniel's been there for me.
Yeah, it felt kind of the first time for a while actually that I've watched a Norwich midfield and felt it was really balanced, and equally that they probably didn't miss Alex Tettey, and that's certainly a position they haven't been too often. And I think the challenge now for Skipp is about consistency, isn't it? And you mentioned his age. I think that's going to be a key part of it, because I certainly remember Harrison Reed putting in a fairly decent performance when he signed on loan in that midfield position, and we know how he ended up at right back and probably ended up looking a bit more comfortable there actually than he did in midfield. So certainly the challenge for Skipp now is to produce that on a more consistent basis. Dan has agreed with you. He's really impressed him recently. Ollie Skipp, he says, I love his positional awareness, the way he dropped into defence in the transition. Of course, a young man, so we need to see if he can do it consistently. And then Shane has come back on Facebook and said, considering Tottenham see him as a future captain, they obviously think he can be the real deal as he develops. Daniel on YouTube, I'd love us to spend big and buy Skipp long term. From what I've seen at Spurs and us, he looks like a Modric in the making. There we go. That's big words for the young man, but it probably talks about how much he's caught the eye, doesn't it, from one performance?
Yeah, I mean, Daniel's right. It's tempting to get carried away, but ultimately, he's a young man, and he will have probably dips, because that's what young players do. They're very, very hard to maintain that consistent level, certainly in the Championship, given how grueling it is. So certainly very good early impression, but, there may be occasions, and it maybe flows a little bit out of the Mario debate, there may be occasions this season where he just needs to be dipped out, maybe the physical and the mental toll of it just takes the edge off his game. But certainly right here, right now, as that comment said, if Mourinho sees him as a future Tottenham captain, then he's a bit special, isn't he? So, Norwich, I think, have done a very good bit of business there.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, he's got a man in Alex Tettey who's going to help him loads in terms of those intangible elements and in terms of that experience and that Championship experience, as Edward has picked up there. Yeah, I think Alex Tettey will be very beneficial this year to him, because I mean he's kind of admitted, hasn't he, that he doesn't expect to be starting every week, but whatever role he plays in that Norwich team will be a leadership one, won't it? So I think that'll be important to Ollie Skipp. We've had a question here from Mark on Ben Gibson. We'll hear this and then we'll probably be with you for about 5 minutes or so. He said, I'm slightly concerned about Ben Gibson, the sort of player who wants/expects to play with the competition. Will he? If not, is he an Oliveira type temperament-wise?
Is there anybody who's an Oliveira type temperament-wise? I don't think there is.
Well, I've seen you, Pad, when you don't get what you want, and it's quite similar.
Behaved. Well behaved. No, I mean, again, like we just discussed with Skip, I think they'll have done plenty of background checks on Gibson. I mean, you're better probably positioned than I am because you've gone and had a pretty in-depth chat with him down at Carrow Road there before the start of the season. So in terms of getting the sense of the character he is, I think you were quite impressed with him as a man, weren't you? Set aside, his footballing ability. So maybe you want to jump back in here, Connor. But no, I don't think there's an issue in terms of, well, yeah, ultimately they pursued him pretty much all summer. So they viewed him as a frontline central defensive option. And that flows out of what we just discussed earlier. Daniel Farke's man management is going to get seriously tested as we move on now, particularly as Grant Hanley, with a fair wind, is back in full training next week. So 5 fit centre-backs for 2 positions. Daniel's going to have to be very diplomatic moving forward for the foreseeable, with the caveat, of course, we have 4 weeks left in the window. Ben Godfrey's been linked with a departure. If that was to change, then maybe then there's a path opens up for Ben Gibson to get into the 11. But certainly, in terms of is he going to be a good tourist? I think absolutely. I think you'd have to be pretty brazen to come straight into a club and then after 1 or 2 games of not being in the 11 kick off. So no, I don't see that at all. But I mean, as I say, Connor, you spoke to him. So what was your impressions of the bloke?
Very genuine, I think, as a human being, first and foremost, and someone who came across as very determined to prove people wrong. I think from Burnley, and perhaps he felt like he didn't get the opportunity that perhaps he warranted after such a long spell at Middlesbrough and that season in the Premier League. And someone who also I think was pretty realistic. So I think he probably understood that given how late towards the start of the season that deal happened, I think there was probably an air of realism that given he hadn't played a game for pretty much a year, that was going to be incredibly difficult to break into that team. So I think he is prepared to play the long game, and I think he is also prepared to fight for his place, and he's happy to do that. So it's going to be really interesting how that battle sort of goes, because I've kind of said he is a left-sided centre-back. That's where Ben Godfrey is for me, and I kind of wonder where Norwich are moulding him into that, because left-sided centre-backs are a bit more of a commodity. They basically get sold for more. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's how they're shaping Ben Godfrey. And now that's the position Ben Gibson wants to break into, and that's going to be incredibly difficult, particularly after Saturday. And I felt Ben Godfrey was very good on Saturday in terms of how he his distribution, and a couple of recovery runs as well was very good. Let's try and round this up then. We'll hear from Daniel Farke in a moment and his view on fans returning as we close the show. Barry has said good afternoon from Ashburn in the USA. So there we go. We've got some viewers on the other side of the pond. I'm not sure if that's quite crack in America, but we'll take it. So thanks for watching, Barry. Shane Jones.
As close as we get to crack in America, Connor.
It is, yeah, I think you're right. Here's one for you, Pad. Shane Jones, what song did you both vote for the walkout music on Saturday? Did you have any particular preference?
Oh, no, I've got to remain impartial, mate. You're the Norwich fan, mate, so with your fan hat on, what would you go for?
Probably none of the options they put there, but that's probably a different debate. I think Right Here, Right Now was winning, wasn't it? Or certainly last time I checked. I think I could live with that.
I liked All of the Lights. I don't know why you wanted to even change that. I quite like that. Ditty.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. I remember when they had Live and Let Die a few years ago, which was an interesting choice, wasn't it? So yeah, we'll see what we hear tomorrow. It's certainly going to be interesting. Craig Brown, the club have to sell Godfrey if we have to keep Godfrey. Godfrey. If we sell him, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. It's an interesting point about Godfrey, isn't it? Because I think he is probably one who, attributes-wise, you'd say is probably better suited to the Premier League, but in terms of where he actually is at the moment in terms of his development, he's one that I certainly feel will or would benefit from another season playing regularly in the Championship. Yeah,
absolutely. I felt sorry for that man, because how did he come on in the 6 months of the Championship title winning season? He was partnered with Christoph Zimmermann, who took on that senior role, and he could just go out there and express himself. And by the end of that season, you thought, well, there's a player there, but he's got so much more to learn. And of course, with all the injury issues, don't need to go into them again. There was early part of the season there, he was the only available centre-back in the Premier League. Now, that was a hell of a burden placed on a young man who's basically, that was only his first full season, essentially, in Norwich's 11. So, And unsurprisingly, he got exposed far too often. Some of the games positionally he was caught out. His concentration levels as well weren't good enough for the Premier League. But I think you have to caveat that with he should never have been exposed to the degree he was. So I'd agree. I think, and we saw evidence already at Huddersfield. I thought he was the dominant of the two out of him and Zimmerman. He was the one who was like, no, I'm the dominant centre back here, stepping out, spraying balls. Good running back the way into the channels, aggressive in one-to-one defending. I think if he had another season in the Championship, he really would be ready for a leading role in the Premier League.
Yeah, I would agree. Right, let's hear from Daniel Farker on the return of fans. Whilst this is on, make sure you get your score predictions down in the comments on whatever platform you're watching. We'll try and rattle through as many of those, and then we'll look to bring it to a close for this week. So here's Daniel Farker on the return of fans. I think it's fair to say that he's very excited to see those of you that are attending tomorrow.
Yeah, hopefully we can give them something to cheer about, but definitely a good first step, and I hope everything goes well and everyone sticks pretty disciplined to the protocol, so that pretty soon we are also allowed to have a full Carrow Road, and but definitely good first steps. Football is a game for supporters, a supporters game. It belongs to the supporters and the people who support the clubs, and this will never change. And for that, yeah, of course, it's important to have them back. And hopefully also my players can take a lift out of this situation.
There we go. That's Daniel Farker on the return of fans. Shane Jones, are you both at Carrow Road on Saturday? We are. Pinken.com, the place to go. Will be usual duties, which is good. So I think it's the first time we've all attended the game for a little while. So that's a positive. It'll be good to see those of you that are going. We'll try and rattle through some of the predictions, and then Pad's got to go and put his sky blue shirt on for this evening's game. Shane has said 2-0, same result as 2 years ago. Dan on Facebook, 2-0. David on YouTube, Norwich 3, Preston 1. Harry on Facebook, 2-0 City. Joe, 3-1, come on you yellows. Barry Young's gone with a very conservative 1-1 draw. And Edward's gone for 2-1 with Jordan Hugill to get the winner, which would be quite a story against his former club. Pad, as we close this off, how are you feeling going in tomorrow? Is there a degree of confidence from you, given what you saw last week?
Yeah, but just in the back of my mind, I don't, if I had to pick a Championship team at this stage of the season, I don't think that Preston would be the one, because they give you nothing really. And if Norwich are kind of still in that getting to know you phase in terms of embedding those new players, and they're playing against a team who are, basically know each other inside out, very well drilled under a manager who knows what he wants and demands that from his players, I can probably see a draw tomorrow. Really, I think it would just be one of those probably frustrating early season games you get where probably Norwich will carve out the better chances, but Preston will just eke something out, I feel. But 4 points from the first two games, it's not the worst start to the proceedings, and just keeps it rolling on again, doesn't it? But yeah, if you put me on the spot, I'd say a draw, maybe 1-1, 2-2.
Yeah, I think I'd be inclined to agree. I think everyone would probably take 4 points from 6, really, from the opening two games. So it's just enough to keep that momentum going, I think, is the aim, isn't it? Right, I think that just about draws it to a close. Someone's wished Coventry good luck for tonight, Pad, on your behalf. So there we go, Edward. So it'd be interesting to see how they get on against QPR. They've had a very interesting summer in terms of their recruitment. Dare I say, a bit Norwich-esque with Chris Badland there, but we won't turn this into a Coventry City show. Thank you all very much for watching. We'll, of course, be at Carrow Road tomorrow, as I mentioned, so Pinken.com, the place to go. You can hear from Paddy all his opinions and Daniel Farker's reaction after the game, as well as all the build-up. We'll have a Facebook Live as well, or we might go on all platforms as we can do now for the team news. So that'll be about 2 o'clock, just before 2 o'clock. So make sure you come back here that time tomorrow. I think that wraps it all up. Make sure you stay safe. And those of you that are attending at Carrow Road tomorrow, we'll give you away from the press box. Thanks for watching. See you soon.